Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IICA webinar on what to expect from COP28 on climate change and agriculture issues. My name is Erin Beasley, and I am an advisor to the program on climate action and agricultural sustainability. Today, our session will be in English para las personas que están aquí con nosotros en vivo y les
And for
gustaría.
the people who are joining us live and would like to hear the interpretation into Spanish, you can select the language in the bottom of your screen where it says interpretation.
For the first time, this is the last session in a webinar series. So you may want to go back and see the other sessions for a broader sense of what we've covered. We've addressed initiatives and programs across the region and how climate action on the ground connects to national and international policy spaces. We've heard from practitioners and leading programs on incentives in the carbon market and agroforestry, including Rabobank and Microsoft's partnership with Acorn. We've heard from agricultural carbon company Bumitra, certification programs for holistic grazing from the American Grass-Fed Association, farming insurance from the government of Brazil, as well as parametric insurance from the company Suyana. From the government side, we've heard about national programs for climate action with representatives who have joined us from Colombia, Ecuador, Costa Rica, and national financial innovations in climate action in Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and Chile. These sessions were recorded in both Spanish and English, and they are available for your reference. I want to thank our previous guests for providing real and practical examples of what's happening in our region for climate action through the Americas and the Caribbean. Today, we'll switch to the international policy arena to talk about what's expected in the upcoming climate negotiations under the United Nations and discuss how this connects to the kinds of climate action that we've described throughout the series. I will share an introduction about what the UNFCCC is and where we are in the overall global process of climate action, and then invite our guests today from the national delegations of the Dominican Republic and Belize, who have joined us to share their perspectives and what they see as key issues to be taken up in the formal negotiations, as well as their hopes for outcomes at this session. COP28 is the annual meeting of the country governments under the international convention called the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. This was created in 1992 as a multilateral fora to build consensus on how to address climate change between national governments. The UNFCCC is the decision-making body that established the Paris Agreement in 2016, and that agreement agrees to limit climate change through national plans, where each country determines its own target and emissions reductions and priority actions. Countries meet formally twice a year with major decisions taken through a consensus process. And this occurs at the COP, or the Conference of the Parties, generally towards the end of the year. Countries have agreed on almost all of the rules of how the Paris Agreement should work, and many countries have already provided updates to their national plans, which are called nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. But there are still topics that haven't been fully agreed, so they are part of the formal agenda for negotiations. Outside of the country-led negotiations, countries, companies, and civil society also use this meeting as a place for exchange on existing priorities, projects, and proposals, and advocacy to push for more ambition to make political declarations outside of the formal negotiating spaces. In the lead up to the COP28 session, there are 3 reports that came out this week that I think can help us to understand whether we're headed in the right direction with our climate action to avoid the worst impacts of climate change across all economic sectors, if we're going fast enough and if we have enough money in the bank to get there. Those 3 documents are WRI's State of the Climate Report, the IIED's report on the current costs of climate adaptation for farmers, in particular for smallholder farmers, and the UNFCCC Secretariat's 2023 Nationally Determined Contribution Synthesis Report. I will put all of these links in the chat for our participants. And you can also look them up on all of these documents up on Google. From these 3 reports together, we see that the collective ambition of countries to lower their greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors of the economy through their nationally determined contributions is not enough to avoid the extreme future effects of climate change, which are much greater than the stressors that we've already been experiencing, and the billions and likely trillions of dollars of costs that are associated. The latest science from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, indicates that greenhouse gas emissions need to be cut by 43% by 2030 compared to 2019 levels. If the latest NDCs are implemented, meaning the NDCs that are most recent or have most recently been updated, current commitments are only slated to reduce emissions by about 2% compared to 2019 levels. So there's still a very big gap in the collective ambition of countries for achieving these emissions reductions. Moving on to the WRI State of the Climate Report. This report also came out on Tuesday, and it analyzes key points of action across all economic sectors, including agriculture, forest and land use, as well as transportation, building, electricity sector, industry, and other sectors. This report is very useful because it gives you a sense of how much faster each action needs to be happening in order to meet the Paris Agreement goals of staying to 1.5 degrees of temperature change. The agricultural sector in these indicators is heading in the right direction across several actions that they identify, but not nearly fast enough. Finally, the International Institute for Environment and Development released an analysis on Tuesday that smallholder farmers are currently footing the bill to adapt to climate change, spending $368 billion annually of their own income on measures to adapt to climate change. This collective number dwarfs the global support that is currently available from private and public sources, which is in the low billions or upper hundreds of millions, and it places a disproportionate financial burden on the communities who are worst positioned to take on this cost. In short, while we have the actions needed for supporting farmers in climate action and transformation of the agricultural sector, more support in the form of finance and programs are needed, and at a much greater speed than is currently happening. To give some sense about how other institutions are responding to these needs at such a large scale, I was listening recently to Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, who is the head of the Global Environmental Facility, and he was talking about his expectations for COP after decades of participation in environmental diplomacy at the national, regional, and international level. If you have the opportunity, I recommend listen to other leaders of the multilateral funds and the other large institutions that are working on climate change. He expressed a commitment and hope in the power that we've seen proven in the international process to bring attention to the important issues surrounding climate change, energy transition, fossil fuel phase out. And he spoke about the need to reformulate policy institutions and frameworks that are no longer fit for purpose for the complexity of climate change. In particularly, he raised the importance of finding stronger links between the environmental and agricultural agendas at the national and international level so that they can work better together and not so far apart. I raise this as one example of how leaders in multilateral funds at the international scale are thinking about their work from both an institutional and policy perspective. Throughout the webinar series this year, we focused mostly on the need for diverse climate action on the ground. Action that reaches farmers through payments for ecosystem services, insurance and incentives, soil conservation, agroforestry, holistic grazing, or other on-farm practices. We also spoke about the national financial policies that can improve this environment for investments in these types of practices on farms. And today's conversation is moving up to the next level in scale, moving out of the national policy context and into this international policy space, diplomatic spaces where countries build common consensus on their shared priorities for climate action. I wanted to provide this background for some context on what our speakers will share today to help connect these different layers of scale. We need all of these layers to create an environment that provides not just finance for climate action, but the right types of finance for different types of agricultural actors, from family farms, smallholders, commodity traders, that increases their ability to continue to produce, process, and distribute food and ensure food security around the world. The COP is one of these places where there is an international space for government, private sector, and civil society to interact. So with that, I would like to introduce our first guest today, Carol Franco, who is a member of the national delegation for the Dominican Republic. She will be negotiating on behalf of the Dominican Republic. She has more than 12 years of experience in international negotiations regarding forests and agriculture. If I could invite Carol to turn on your video. She will share a little bit more in detail about what has been going on within this policy space of the negotiations more recently and what we see as the important priorities coming up for this particular session. Thank you so much for being with us, Carol, and welcome.
Thank you, Erin, and good morning to everyone. Buenos días, todas y todos. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I will speak in English. Basically, the main reason is because I know most of the names in English are not Spanish, believe it or not. So it's easier for me to talk about the negotiations in English. But I know there is interpretation, so I think we're all okay. I will share my screen. I have a very short presentation and I'm going to touch in certain topics. And I'm not going to just give a big landscape of what are we expecting first on ag, of course, and then I'm going to touch on 2-3 main topics outside of ag. And then I'm going to let Clifford continue, and then we're going to have enough time for Q&A. Just want to say beforehand, anything that you may want to add. I know some of my colleagues from the negotiations are here, and anything that I missed or they want to add, please join and share with us what could I have missed. there's a lot going on. So that's what I'm saying. Your comments are always welcome. So please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, but not yet in presentation mode.
Is that okay?
Okay.
Perfect. So basically what to expect at COP28. And before we get there, I want to go a little bit back on, our decision, since it's going to be, well, I think it's already a year ago. And that was decision 3CP 27, which is the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on implementation of climate action on agriculture and food security. Pretty long title and a lot of things into it. And that is, it took us a long time and a lot of discussions and negotiations to get to this decision. It's a very thorough decision with a lot of different items that we need to tackle. And I think we're all happy with what came out and all the time and efforts we put into it. If you haven't taken a look at it yet, please take a look at it. There's a lot of information there that can help our countries move forward with implementation and means of implementation. So just wanted to put that there and then continue with what were some of the actionable paragraphs in the decision. So you have a decision and you have the preambles and there's a lot of information there, but let's focus on what we needed to do. What were the actionable paragraphs that are there? And one of these is paragraph 14, which basically requests a subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice. And so the Substan SBI basically to establish a 4-year Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on implementation of climate action on agriculture and food security, including the implementation of the outcomes of the Cornevia workshops, joint work, which were 5 workshops, and previous activities addressing issues related to agriculture, as well as future topics recognizing those solutions. So basically what is the roadmap? What are the elements? How are we going to be able to implement the objectives? And there were 7 objectives there that we need to implement. And those objectives, you can find it in the decision. But this is paragraph 14 is like the heart. So we are establishing a 4-year program. How are we going to be able to implement those objectives? What is the roadmap? What are the elements that we need to address and include to implement those objectives? Then there's paragraph 15, which in this case refers to first the annual synthesis report on the work undertaken by the constituted bodies and financial and other entities under the convention, as well as relevant international organizations on activities related to the joint work, and the workshops. So what are the future topics? What are those workshops that we're going to have? They should be hybrid, so people can access them if they can from where they live. So that way we provide more access to people that cannot go to the COPs. But this was also very important that there is a very important point of being in person. So most of us, the negotiators, can be there and agreed on how those topics could be included on our actions and plans in the countries. So we had, this is another actionable paragraph, very important. So we have 14 and we have 15. And then basically also mentions later the development of a portal. And that portal was key for us. So what happened is, we had a call. So for the bond negotiations, and in that decision invites parties and observers to submit by March via submission portal the views on the elements of the joint work referring paragraph 14 and 15 for consideration by the subsidiary bodies. So basically the elements and roadmap, the synthesis report, and the future workshops, the future work. And also invites parties and observers via the submission portal, the operationalization of the portal referring paragraph 16. So there's a paragraph 16 that basically established the portal. So what is going to go into that portal? How are we going to handle that? What is important to include, etc. But what happened in Bonn? So we met in Bonn, and our discussions focus in those in 4 main topics that turn into 5. First, on the elements. So what are those elements? On paragraph 14, refer to paragraph 14, that will be able to, that we need to implement, that we need to take into consideration in order to be able to implement those 7 objectives that we have. So what are those elements that we have? Well, how are we going to deal with those elements? And we worked a lot on, okay, how it would look? What would be the roadmap? What are we going to do from now till for the 4 year, from now to 2026, right? So how are we going to make this happen? There was a synthesis report, the other topic that we touch on. Basically, is how it should be. What should it contain? Should it have a summary? Should we have an introduction? Are we talking about what activities, overview of activities? Should we include also what the financial institutions are doing? So the gaps, so how much information? Talk about, it couldn't be too big, too broad, because if we do it too broad, then what will happen is that people will not read it. And also this synthesis report is going to be done by the secretariat. So we can also not say, okay, put everything and anything in there. So what type of information can go in it? What would be important for us countries to really have the information on, to really grasp that information and use it? What exactly would be very, very useful for us? And we have to be strategic and we need to prioritize. Future topics, the workshops. All the different countries, all the parties submitted workshops, and there was a lot of discussion towards what can we include, what workshops can we include, what would be the topics, should we go broad and then have a general topic? Because at the end, what we were going to have was 3-4 workshops, okay, and then include different subtopics into it so we can touch on everybody's. How are we going to go about it? How we make sure that everybody has at least one of the topics that is important for that party or group of party included. We had also the portal, and this was another one, like, okay, should be open, should be closed, should be open and accessible for everyone, but also have a differentiated between countries and then the rest, between government of the country and then the rest of the country, NGOs, private sector, etc. What information do we want? What form are we going to use to put that information in? Focuses should be sharing information of project initiatives and policies, and that's it in our decision, for increasing opportunities for implementation. So how are we going to put that information there? Not reinventing the wheel. What other portals are out there that we can use, that we can basically incorporate, that we can copy? Like, okay, this is a great portal. Why don't we do something like this and have that information? It's easy, is available. People will have access. People can understand it very well. We don't want a portal that people need to do a PhD in order to understand it, something like ready to be used, etc. So these were all the questions, all the different issues we were talking about. Each of these topics, okay, imagine this is an umbrella, and each of these topics had all these different ideas, issues that we needed to touch on. And then finally, the issue of governance scheme proposed. Some parties, some countries propose a governance scheme as to how we're going to make all this happen. How is this going to make it? We're going to make sure that this time we also focus on implementation. So we need to have this body, this governance, this scheme that will allow us to make it happen. So these were the topics that we discussed in Bonn, according to our decision from November 2022, which is our SHARM decision, 3CP27. But sadly, we were not able to agree, and we were not able to get to any agreement on these topics. And our conclusion was that we're going to continue our deliberations and our discussions in Dubai. So for Dubai, we have exactly the same elements, the same main topics that we had for Bonn. And we need to discuss all this in Dubai, where we have less time for the discussion since it's a COP. So there are many other issues happening. There are many other topics happening, and there are 2, 3, or at least 2 big ones that are going to be going on now in Dubai. And I'll touch a little bit on those outside of agriculture at the end. So these are the topics, again, that everything I mentioned before, we're going to have to discuss again, start over from each one of these topics here and get to agreements so we can then move forward. We have our decision. There are things we need to do based on our decisions. They're very clear, but we need to put our heads together and agree on how we're going to move forward with these elements that are part of our decision. There is a lot of work to be done on this. I am very confident that we are going to do it and we're going to move forward with it, but we need to be extremely strategic and efficient with time. Again, we do not have much time during COPs. This is not going to be any difference in COP28. So we need to make sure that, and I think countries and group of countries and negotiation groups are already strategizing. What can we put forward to what can we put on the table so we can move forward? What of these 5 different topics that we need to achieve, that we need to make progress, that we need to tackle while we're in the COP? Okay, how can we do it? Where can we just get certain things rolling? Where do we have a lot of similarities? Where can we make sure that we get to an agreement so we can then continue with our work program? We are very, very conscious about the timing. We know it's until 2026, and it's a 4-year joint work program. So we are aware of that, and we know we have a lot of work to do. And I think all countries understand that, and all countries are going to do their best to make it happen. So this is kind of in general what has happened and what would we need to be focusing on in Dubai. Again, exactly all the different little elements for each of these topics we're going to be discussing again, since we were not able to reach any agreements during Bonn. So we need to open them again and discuss them again. And at least we have some work done and we have fresh ideas, and we have been able to think about other things that we can add to it. It was very short timing, believe it or not, between the decision in Dubai, in Sharm el-Sheikh, and our meeting in Bonn, in the sense of we needed to submit, and it was March already, and we needed to submit by March, and it was running against time to make it happen. So we have had more time to mature ideas. We have had more time to make sure we are really encompassing the depth of our decision. And I'm very positive that now in Dubai, we're going to be able to move forward and start really with implementation. So that's in the negotiation side. But there is the outside the negotiations in agriculture. But there's a lot happening. Ag is a huge topic in Dubai. And we have a declaration that's been circulated, and is the Emirates Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems, and Climate Action. This declaration has basically 5 main objectives, and these objectives are very important in general. Again, this is happening outside our negotiation of Sharm. This is a declaration for heads of states and ministers. So it's about scaling up adaptation and resilience activities and responses in order to reduce vulnerability. It's promoting food security and nutrition by increasing efforts to support vulnerable people through approaches such as social protection system and safety nets, supporting workers in agriculture and food systems, including women and youth whose livelihoods are threatened by climate change impacts, strengthening the integrated management of water in agriculture and food systems, which, by the way, there is going to be a high-level meeting on the nexus of agriculture and water. I'll talk a little bit about that. Maximize the climate and environmental benefits, reducing the harmful impacts associated with agriculture and food systems by conserving, protecting, and restoring land and natural ecosystems. And to achieve these, of course, according to our national circumstances, expedite the integration of agriculture and food systems into our climate action, and simultaneously mainstream climate action across our policy agendas and actions related to agriculture. This declaration, it's already been circulated. There was a draft work done, and then there were some draft presented to all countries, that we had the space and the time that we were able to provide comments. Many countries provided those comments. Some of those comments were addressed. Some of those comments were not addressed, as you can probably imagine, because it would always be conflict when you provide comments. Some countries want this, some countries want that. But basically, this is the Emirates Declaration. All our countries in the Americas have received it. We have heard from our heads of delegation, ministers of agriculture, about what do we think as negotiators about it. We have provided our comments and our insights on it. And I think there are certain questions we should also think about while we are talking about this and talking to our ministers, our head of delegations, because there are questions that still remain as to, at least in my head, how are we going to achieve these 5 objectives? So how is this going to really happen? How this declaration help us or benefit us here in the Americas? How can we make it useful for us? What would it need to make it real? What would we need to make it real? What would we need to really take advantage of it? Are there any resources attached to it? Because there's a lot of objectives. Okay, so we're going to scale up adaptation and resilience activities. How are we going to be able to do that? Is this related to more funding to GGA, or to how is this really happening? What type of resources do we really need? Are we talking about finance? Are we talking about capacity building? Are we talking about technology? What are we really talking about? These are some of food for thought questions that I think we need to at least take into consideration and think about, because there will be, I hope so, this space to say, okay, if they ask us, what do you need? Or what do you really, how can you make use of this? We need to know how we can make use of it. We need to know, okay, this is important for us, but this is what we need in order to be able to implement those 5 objectives, or those objectives will not be implemented. So we need to have all this at least thought about, and have this ideas somehow concrete, so we can have answers, or we can ask those questions to them, or ask our ministers to ask those questions and say, okay, so this is great, we can support it, but how are we going to be able to implement this? Where is this funding coming from? Is there funding attached to it? Is there any plan for funding to be attached to it? So those are some of the questions we should really try to get our heads around. There's also COP28 ministerial dialogue on building water resilient food systems. And this is the United Arab Emirates and Brazil, which will co-host. And they will have the first ever ministerial dialogue on water resilient food systems at the COP. And it aims to bring together agriculture and water ministers and the private sector, international organizations, to showcase innovative policy, finance, technology, water, to address all the different issues that we are encountering right now. So it's water and ag, basically. Also, there's the proposed 2-year partnership will be launched under the UNFCCC Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance. And this will support parties and non-state actors to better integrate water and food system management for both adaptation and mitigation. Again, this is a partnership, this is a dialogue. What does it entail? And these are the questions. So yes, do we want to be part of this partnership? What does it entail? And they're talking about it will support parties and non-state actors ahead of COP30 to better integrate water and food systems. How is it going to support? What type of support are we talking about? When is the support happening? Through what mechanism is this support happening? So these are the different questions about that we need to start thinking also with each of these initiatives or declarations. It's okay, but sounds great. Let's just try to implement this, but how? And what is provided and how we have access to it. And then from the countryside, what do we need? What do we exactly need? What are our plans? What initiatives do we already have underway that will need that type of support? And then we have outside the negotiations, we have the FAST, which is the Food and Agriculture for Sustainable Transformation Initiative. And high-level inception meeting will be happening on the FAST partnership at COP on December 10th at 14 hours GST. And basically, I imagine many of us know, but can you see the little screen there? Hopefully. Erin?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the website. It's available for everyone, and it will give you a reminder of what are we talking about. And basically, the 3 pillars of FAST, which are really important, are FAST is a multi-stakeholder partnership and aims to catalyze and accelerate the transformation of agriculture and food systems by 2030. So it's basically operationalized. It's an operationalization of the FAST initiative. This is the partnership, and the 3 pillars of FAST are access to finance, which is very important, knowledge and capacity, and policy support and dialogue. And you can find all the different information here, membership forms and everything. So this meeting will be launched basically in COP20. The inception meeting at FAST Partnership will be at COP28 on December 10th. That is the Ag Day. So we will be there, and we will also we're looking forward to hear more information about it. Again, the website is there. There's some infographic. There's some information, or a certain amount of information about FAST that is important to keep in mind. And our countries and our governments have met, some of them, with FAO, and they are also providing more information about it. And I cannot dive too much into the FAST initiative because I know what everybody knows or what is on the websites. So I am looking forward to this inception meeting to hear more about it and to learn more about it. But this is something that is actually also happening while we are in Dubai. And finally, I just want to call your attention for the food and agriculture and water at COP28. And this is basically, if you go to December 10th, you're going to find all the different events that are going to be happening that day. There are a lot of events happening during the 10th of December for Food and Ag Day. And it's on the website. And you just need to look for thematic program, and you're going to find it there. And basically, also, they have made it, I would say, pretty nicely that you can do this. And you can also see what else is not on the 10th. So there are other meetings, a few meetings that will not happen the day of agriculture, and you can go and see those too. But you can find out right there in thematic programs. There are going to be a whole day just for ag, food, and water systems. And then there's going to be a few other events happening throughout the week, and side events happening throughout the week that you can find for agriculture and food.
Carol, the events that you shared with us on the cop28.com website, are these digital, virtual, or they're primarily for folks who will be going to Dubai?
As far as I know, they are. A lot of these events could be hybrid, but still the YouTube website of the COP, I don't think is available yet. So I'm not very sure about how they're going to go about it. So we still need to know. All I know is that some of them are hybrid, so they would have access from the outside. But we had a lot of issues in Sharm about hybrid events, as you can remember, or some of us can remember. So we need to find more information about that.
Thank
you. And so, as my colleagues from the Dominican delegation always tell me, Carol, do you know there are other topics, important topics outside agriculture at COPs and at the negotiations? And so, yes, there are other topics that are also as important as in agriculture, even though when we are there, we cannot even know what's going on because we are so focused on our own topics, but that happens to all of us. And I'm just gonna touch base on two of them, and one of them is the GST. We're gonna finally conclude our first GST at COP28. Synthesis report was released in September 2023 and basically states that we are really far off track to be able to limit the rise in global average temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And this is important to keep in mind because we will not, because then what then? So if we are so far off track for the 1.5, what's going to be the response at COP? What are our country leaders going to do? How are we going to handle that? Would they be taking action? What kind of rapid and strong action can be taken to try to get back on course? So those are some of the questions that are going to be happening. More than anything, we have the report. We're going to conclude what is going to be the action taken. How are we going to be able to handle this? What are going to be the reaction of our country leaders? And that's what a lot of the world is waiting to see. And finally, the other last two would be the loss and damage fund, which we already had now in Abu Dhabi on November 3rd and 4th. We had the 5th meeting of the Transitional Committee on the operationalization of the new funding arrangements. And there was a co-chair proposal. It's a document of, I think, 17 pages. It's a long document. I have it in case anybody wants to see it, but that's public. In that document, they are inviting the World Bank to operationalize the fund as a World Bank hosted financial intermediary fund. This is a co-chair proposal. This needs to be negotiated in Dubai. So it's not that this is happening. It's a co-chair proposal that is a text that now is going to be negotiated in Dubai. And this is important because then at least there is a text. So hopefully there's going to be a lot of discussions, but there's a text to work with. Basically, this is very much related to GGA, which is the Global Goal and Adaptation, and the fact that we need to increase our resources and our financing for adaptation and how we can do that. And there's a big call as to at COP28, how will be able or how finance will be provided in order for countries to meet the adaptation goals that they have and in order to adapt and increase resilience of their natural resources and climate resilience in their plans because of the impacts of climate change. And I'm going to leave it up to here and let Clifford continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Carol, for this really important overview of what's happening, both in the technical aspects of the negotiations for agriculture, the strategic events that are happening in this space, side events, and other information sharing that's occurring with partners during this time as well as the other major negotiating topics that are priorities for the session this year. I'd like to pass to our next presenter, Clifford Martinez. Clifford is joining us from the Ministry of Agriculture in Belize, where he is the Acting Director of Climate Change and Water Management, and he is the Agriculture Lead for COP negotiations. Thank you so much for being with us, Clifford, and we look forward to your reflections about what we should expect from COP28. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Thanks very much, Carol, for the introduction. I think you did a very good summary of what to expect and what is the nature of COP. Thanks, Erin, and thanks, Ika, for the invitation as well. I am comforting in knowing that I can make my contribution a bit more specific to the recommendations that countries should have going into COP negotiations or the informals. I'll carry on where Carol left off, and I think it needs to be highlighted that this COP is of particular interest for several reasons, especially since the global stocktake synthesis report is now ahead of us, and the final process in that procedure is the consideration of the output. So the review of that synthesis report by the team and then the actions that should come after those are going to be very interesting. Remembering that the Paris Agreement was indeed a commitment that was made by countries. It's a fixed commitment, and it's a call to action. It's a plan to action. It's not like the other conventions where we're not as obligated to comply with the Paris Agreement. Is indeed separate and unique in itself. Specific for Belize, and what I would recommend for our countries is clearly what the COP has initially been designed to do. Remember, this is our COP number 28. In terms of the other agreements and discussions that need to happen, we cannot forget that there is still the COP arena or the COP platform still ensures for us to discuss or look at the meetings of the parties of the Kyoto Protocol, which is called the CMP, and also the meeting of the parties of the Paris Agreement, which is CMA, and the global stocktake is specific to the Kyoto Protocol. And then, of course, there's the subsidiary body agreement, meetings and the substand, the SBTA. When you look at the environment that's there, when you look at the arena that's established, the platform that's established, there are opportunities there for discuss all of the critical sectors. I know the question is, why are we only discussing agriculture, or why are we discussing, or why are we assuming that there's a discussion solely on conventional agriculture? And that's not the case. Parties, groups, the regions are able to present their interests, present their national priorities. And if those national priorities is looking at abiding to the agreement with the Sustainable Development Goals, then we know that specific for agriculture, we're looking at sustainable practices. We're looking at technologies that are of low emission, reduce energy dependency, and we're looking at those sort of technologies and tools and capacity building that helps each country, each citizen, and each sector to build their resiliency. We're looking at resiliency in the forms of mitigation and adaptation. So I thought I'd mention that as a partial introduction, because as a representative on our delegation, my focus will be agriculture, of course, but our team is going to be expressing our interests and presenting our priorities, and then joining those priorities with the region and other countries, and responding to the threats, also to the tourism sector, for example. And as I mentioned, to the energy sector, to the health sector, which has become of particular interest. But we're clear that this webinar is looking at agriculture and what to expect at this year's COP. And so when Carol did that introduction and those presentation, it allows us to understand that there's a procedure here. There are processes in place. There's a history behind where we're at today. And despite the difficulties that we have, we still participate in these negotiations, or in these informal, in these discussions, with that hope, with that understanding and appreciation that all of us agreeing that there are challenges, there are difficulties. We need to reduce emissions. We need to retain the 1.5 commitment that we're making, or even less than that, because the projections are suggesting that even with 1.5 degrees, we're still going to see some severe and significant threats to our economies. In the case of where we are at in the discussion with Sharm el-Sheikh, that's been a very interesting conversation and an interesting line of discussions. And it looks very promising. It looks very hopeful that indeed this year's COP will be able to get to an agreement and finalize and then carry out the actions as indicated earlier. It's at where we have about 3 years remaining. And there's some pressure for us for time, but in our opinion, it's always best that everybody agree and that our commitments are synergetic, and that we value the time and the effort in hearing everyone's concern and getting it detailed and addressed enough so that we are benefiting in the future. I'd say that our delegation from Belize has been given some experience from some of the more knowledgeable and experienced negotiators, and I'm honored, and it's humbling to be beside Carol and some of the others that have participate in and understand the intricacies and the politics and sometimes the clashes that happen at these negotiations. But also they are the same individuals that continue to remind us that we need to be positive and remain focused in ensuring that our national priorities are presented and ensuring that we are in an environment where we are able to compromise as best as possible, however, not jeopardizing the direction and the focus of each individual parties, or in this case, countries. I don't have a presentation per se. My contribution is solely going to be verbal. And I do want to emphasize that the new presidency for this year, because we're still under the presidency of Egypt, it's not until the 30th of November at the launch of the COP that then United Arab Emirates will take on the presidency. But the presidency plan of action is a very interesting plan of action, and it aligns very much with the plan of action of the COP going into this year. And I saw 4 specific major theme or subject points in terms of his plans of action. And the first one was to fast track the energy. This is information that's on the website, on the UNFCCC website, as on the COP website, as indicated by Carol. And you can refer there for additional information. But he's indicated there his four particular points that I have looked at, and it's fast track energy, to fix climate finance, to focus on nature, people, lives, and livelihoods, and then full inclusivity. And it's interesting to see where these main topics, how these main topics have been derived at by the presidency, and how he has allowed these he's allowed us to see that indeed they align with what the COP direction is. I think this COP will see an interesting participation from interest groups in terms of energy, and then especially in terms of the loss and damage funds. We know that the existing financial mechanism for climate finance is the GCF, the GEF, and then of course adaptation. But now there's this addition, there's this proposal, this submission of this text that will be negotiated in terms of loss and damage. And clearly, as it's specific to agriculture, that is the main concern that we've had. The difficulties that countries have been having has been the low rate, or the minimum rate of access to finance that has happened throughout the years. And that's one of the reasons why the Coronavia document came into play. And then more specifically with the presentation at G77 at Sharm el-Sheikh last year, how that other document came into play. And it's basically to look at ensuring that these finances that have been allocated, these resources, these assistance that has been allocated, that it reaches the stakeholders, that it reaches every sector, that it reaches every country. And that's very important. In our case, for these all focus, our national priorities to look at improving the agriculture sector in efficiency, but also within the sustainable content. There is no separation of the goals and objectives of COP from what is the sustainable development goal. There's no separation there. And when we speak about sustainable development, you're speaking about the sort of development that includes and protect livelihoods, that has a social dimension, to protect people, or most important, one of the most important human resource, to protect the environment, but also to ensure that there's income earning, whether for the private sector or for the civil society or for public citizenry. And so within the agriculture sector, there is a call for us to make some adjustments and refrain, or as best as possible, minimize the impact, the negative impacts of conventional agricultural practices. And in those, you can speak about regenerative agriculture, you can speak about organic, you can speak about agroecological practices, but those have to be what the countries specifically request. In terms of our requests through the Sharm el-Sheikh, we are looking at practices that indeed ensure for reduced emissions. We're looking at practices that align with mitigation and adaptation to the threats of climate change. And then we're looking at those practices specific to the agriculture sector, those that reduces the impact of variability, climate variability. And so you're looking at seasonal changes and how we can respond as best as possible, and then still ensure for food security. And so in terms of my contribution, I would say that Belize, we are focusing on increasing that productivity in the agricultural workforce. We have a large 50% of our population is rural, and then that makes a large dependency on the agriculture sector. Our GDP contribution to the agriculture is in and around 13 or 15%, and it's common for many countries, developing countries, or at least developed countries. The agriculture sector or the primary sectors are main income earners, provide for livelihood protection, and then in our case for agriculture, it provides for food security. And so we're looking at efficiently, but yet with sustainable practices, ensuring the protection of our agriculture sector, but ensuring food and feed security. I would also want to indicate here that the specific COP agenda is, or the key topics for this year for COP. And again, these are information that is open access and on the website. The key topics for this COP is the future use of and setting up the deadline to phase out fossil fuels. It's the insufficient progress by signatories to the Paris Agreement in curbing greenhouse gas emissions. And there was a detailed presentation on global stocktake. As we mentioned earlier, we're in the final phase of the global stocktake. And we're hoping to see what are some of the actions that will come through the review of the synthesis report and adaptation of the synthesis report. And then there's global climate action in agriculture and food security. And of course, the most attractive, or what seems to be one of the most attractive going into this year's COP, the loss and damage fund. Why is this event important for us in the Caribbean and in Latin America? As we mentioned, it is comforting to see that the COP's presidency plan of action is comforting to see that his direction or his focus or his support is going to be embedded in the key topics of COP this year, especially as it pertains to the issue of fossil fuels, reducing or phasing out fossil fuels, but still fast-tracking energy in terms of what renewable energy practices or more efficient energy actions and energy uses in the different sectors. The agriculture sector is one of the larger consumers of energy in whatever form that energy can be presented in. In fact, it's also the largest component of our cost of production. And we have seen over the past 4 years, different impact to this sector. Of course, COVID-19, the main impact. However, there's been the issue of geopolitical issues, and especially those geopolitical issues where the source of energy and the source of feed and food is affected. That is the Ukraine and Russia issue. And now we're seeing some challenges in the Middle East. And so those have significant impact and threats in addition to the issue of climate change. The agriculture sector is one of the most vulnerable to these changes. Like I mentioned, what was the impact caused by the coronavirus? What is the impact caused by the Ukraine-Russia issue? And what is the impact that has been caused by global inflation? In Belize, for example, we have seen inflation rate of 7 and 8%. That has caused, for example, the cost of production in the agriculture sector to increase significantly. The cost of agricultural inputs, conventional agricultural inputs, at least, has gone up to 1.10% in terms of agriculture, and in terms of pesticides and herbicides, and those have seen an average increase in price about 65 or 75%. So the cost to produce it has increased, which translates into the cost of food and food commodities also increasing. And so inflation is one of the biggest threats, or those financial shocks, the global financial shocks, continue to be one of the biggest threats to countries like ours, which means that it is important and it's very necessary for us that when we are at the table negotiating, we approach with the background of these issues affecting us, but also approach with recommendations that can see us reduce our dependency on some of these externalities or cope as best as possible with the external changes that are occurring. I don't want to extend too much other than finalizing now in suggesting that for us, Caribbean and then for Latin America, that our focus will always be looking at the impacts of climate change from the increased weather variability. This is specific to the agriculture sector. Increases in extreme weather events like droughts, increased flooding and storms of recent has taken a toll on our sector. We've seen losses, we've seen damages. And so we are justified when we approach the negotiation. We are very justified. We're able to provide the data and the information to indicate that we are very vulnerable, that we have been affected, and that we are in need of a collective approach and a collective agreement to design, to build, and then to apply the sort of measures that will see us build more resiliency. There's those impacts that created both economic losses for the agriculture sector as well as social challenges for farmers and for food security within our countries and within the region. So we need to look at food security, food availability, and of course, look at, as a regional bloc, how we can commit to regional initiatives and then how we can apply them and then see the benefits received by the right beneficiaries. I think those are sufficient in terms of my contribution, Erin. And I think I can add more if there's questions or concerns. I think we can enrich the presentation in that form. Sorry, I'm very confident that I don't want to repeat a lot that has been mentioned by Carol and presented by Carol. She did such an excellent job, and I'm again very humbled to always be beside Carol in these sort of settings. And we live and we learn every day. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Clifford. I think you really helped us to understand too the interrelation between the agricultural sector and the other sectors that are going through both the negotiations process as well as the impacts of climate change on other sectors in the economy, and how all of these pieces need to fit together, and we need to have these multi-sectoral responses. So while we see impacts in one sector and we care in this particular conversation about agriculture as our topic of interest, we see we see relationships with other sectors like the finance sector, infrastructure, other decision making across the economy. So thank you for bringing up those points and for sharing your perspective from Belize. I'd like to give Carol and Clifford an opportunity to make final comments. For those who are able to stay with us, we've gone a little bit past the hour, but we'll finish within the next 10 minutes. So I wanted to open the floor for Carol and Clifford if you have any final comments after hearing each other's presentations, or additional thoughts that you have about folks who are maybe not able to attend the COP and how to stay involved in this information.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Clifford, so much for presenting those views and putting agriculture in a very broad perspective and how it's interrelated, interconnected, and the different nexus that we have in our negotiation with everything else that's happening, not only within the negotiations, but outside in the real world that we have to live every day and make decisions. My final comments would be, it's a very important point for me to thank ICA for creating these spaces. This type of spaces and all the support we have received as the Americas have made us as LAC a very strong group as LAC, but also has provided the opportunities for us to exchange our views, to meet with the negotiators of Americas from Mexico, United States, Canada, and that has enriched a lot our positions, our understanding, our relations among ourselves, and have made a huge difference. And for LAC, for the region, and American Caribbean, as you know, we are not a negotiating group. We are different countries negotiating on our own. However, we have make a point and make efforts to try to create this joint submissions and try to have these points and positions. that we can all feel comfortable in, and also that we thank that to ICA. So I wanted to make that point first, and then continue saying we are all working very hard to get those agreements, to get moving forward. We have a wonderful decision in the negotiations of agriculture. We just need to put our heads together, implement, and we have done it before. We're going to do it again. I'm completely positive. I don't want to leave any of you thinking it's going to be complicated. Yes, it's going to be complicated. Everything in life is complicated. Everything that matters in life is complicated. So this is just something else that we're going to have to deal, and we're going to have to muddle through, and we're going to get to, we're going to be successful at the end. So just to let you know, it's complicated. Many parties, many countries. Remember, this is not personal. These are the interests of our countries, and we're thinking about the whole population behind us. That's why it makes it so complicated. But at the end, we all get to our agreements. So positive thoughts, and thank you so much again for having us here.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, thanks very much again, Erin, and thanks, Carol, again. It's always a pleasure. It's only about resonating what has been placed on this discussion. It's, first of all, we have to understand that this is negotiation, and it comes with a level of being open-minded when you go into, attending these events. There's no rigid one position that you should ever go into, and so that's one of the most positive things I like about the discussion that has happened. And I like that everyone is equal around the table. And that's interesting to see, and it's important to continue emphasizing on that sort of democracy. I also want to say that this may seem indeed complex, but it's because of institutions, organizations like ICA, like FAO, like OIRSA in our region, and that we've been able to narrow down and streamline what are the important priorities and make them pertinent to the region and then to each individual country. So it's important for the work to continue and continue support to be given to ICA, to FAO, and to these sort of organizations that have a regional responsibility. And I can say that with the fact that when I try to understand the literature, it's those literature that has been revised and reviewed by our experts. That's always the most easier to understand. It's not strange, it's not alien, and the language of UN sometimes, that legal language, can appear alien to some of us. And so technicians like ourselves should, our scientists like ourselves should participate in the formulation of some of these proposals, participate in the composition of some of these texts, and then give the data, provide the necessary scientific data, and provide the anecdotes and the indigenous knowledge information that is to be used to substantiate our position, to justify our position, and then to lobby for the support, and then carry on through. Capacity building is the overall theme, and we do want that if indeed finances can be identified, we need to have the in-house capacity at home to not only source the finance, but then to implement on these projects. There's a lot of times when finance is sourced and it has to be returned to the sourcer because diminished or reduced capacity or technical expertise nationally and regionally to implement on some of these initiatives. I would like to end there and say thanks again very much. I really do appreciate the opportunity. And I'd encourage that indeed after COP, we probably get together again to look at what we were able to achieve from that COP, or what we would expect to see in the future, preparing for the next SB, the next so their body meetings and the follow-up technical meeting. Because indeed, as Carol indicated, when we left Sharm el-Sheikh, the period between then and the bond meetings was a very short period. And you might think that agreeing to a text is sufficient. It's not entirely so. So we need to dedicate our time and our efforts, and I'm sure the resources will indeed arrive for some of us that need it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Clifford Martinez from the Ministry of Agriculture in Belize, Carol Franco from the delegation of the Dominican Republic to the UNFCCC. I'm very glad to have you both here. before we leave, I'd like to make a quick announcement for the folks who are joining us with IICA. The organization will be sponsoring an America's Pavilion at the COP. This event will, this pavilion will share over 50 events to give voice to the agricultural sector, particularly from the region, as well as inviting partners from other regions in the world. There will be recordings of these events that will be posted after the event for those who are not able to attend, or individuals who are able to be at the negotiations in Dubai. You're welcome to also participate and attend those events as well. So you can look up that information on the COP website, as Carol mentioned, under cop28.com or under the UNFCCC website. So for the delegations that are preparing to attend, we wish you the best of luck from all of the representative member countries of IICA as they prepare for that session. And we want to thank both our presenters, Clifford Martinez and Carl Franco, for their insights today, and also thank our previous guests in this webinar series for all of the information that they've shared around climate action and agriculture in the past months. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next year.
Hasta luego, un gusto. Chao.
Chao, cuídense.